Donald Trump would like you to think that he can be a dictator on day one, right? That's his whole thing, is projecting strength, is claiming powers he doesn't have, is saying, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to do that and nobody is going to stop me. And we should be real with ourselves. He is going to try to do a lot of very damaging and harmful stuff. But we actually have an enormous amount of power still within our system, within our democratic system, to stop him, because power in America is not concentrated with the president, right? I mean, well, there's quite a lot that's concentrated with the president, but power actually lies at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level in Congress. And we can actually tap into each of those levels to try to hold off harm, to make sure that we make this political case against what is happening and really reveal that the Trump agenda, for its chaos, its cruelty, its corruption.
Welcome back to another episode of Just the Facts with me, the Watergate girl, Jill Wine-Banks. And today's very special guest is Leah Greenberg, the co-founder of Indivisible. She has been an activist, obviously, for a very long time. When Trump came into power, she saw that the people's power needed to be harnessed, and she took action. She had a long political career, well, maybe not so long, but had a political career involved in helping other members of Congress prior to doing this. But this was one of the great ideas. And Leah, I don't know if you know, but Indivisible sort of gave me my television career indirectly, because I heard about a Project Op-Ed course, and it turned out that it was organized by the Indivisible chapter here in Chicago. And so for the first time, I met a lot of members of Indivisible, took the course with them on a Sunday. On Tuesday, James Comey got fired. And I thought, well, I should write an op-ed because I just took this course and I have something to say about this. So I did. It got published, goodness. And that's what led to my television career. So I have to thank Indivisible greatly for that, but really for all the work that you have done to create a way for people to harness their power and to take action. You have a viral guide that I want to talk about today. And so maybe we can start with that. Tell me how that came about and what are the specific things that you recommend in the guide for people to do to take on the problems that we are facing right now.
Absolutely. Well, before I get started, I just want to say, Jill, thanks for having me and thanks for sharing that incredible story. That is amazing. I think one of the coolest things about the Indivisible movement is that it really is about asking all of us to tap into our power and our leadership. And so it's just beautiful and really cool to know that we're part of your journey, as well as so many other women around the country. So the
men and women, let me just say.
Men and women.
I have to say thank you to Jason, who's gotten me more involved by asking me to speak at various rallies you've had. So it's definitely both. And your husband.
It's definitely both. It is both. It is a all gender movement, and also I think we can be clear that like a substantial majority of the people who got active in response to Trump, at least the first time around, was women. We can hope for more men this time. But I'll talk a little bit about the updated Indivisible guide. So we, in 2016, right after Trump was elected, we wrote our first version of the Indivisible guide. It was a pretty simple set of ideas, right? It was organize locally, pressure your members of Congress, never give an inch, and this is how we're going to hold off a lot of the harm that Trump can do. This one is updated for the new times and for what's changed, right? Which is the Republican Party has consolidated under Trump. The media environment has changed. The judicial system has changed. In a lot of ways, we're facing some really dark currents that we weren't in 2017. However, some other things have changed in our favor, right? Simultaneously, in 2016, there were, 6 Democratic trifectas. There are 15 Democratic trifectas now. That is a sea change.
Let me just stop you for a second so that everyone understands. Trifecta means the governor and both houses of the state legislature are one party. And in this case, we now have 15 with Democratic governors and Democratic House and Senates.
Right, right. So thank you. That's a great correction, and that's a huge source of power that wasn't available to people who were looking to stop Trump in
Yeah.
2016. Right. Simultaneously, in 2017, there was a congressional majority in the House for Republicans of about 43 members. Now they are going to have a majority of, it looks like, 3. So some things have changed. Some things are different. We talk about how do you tap into your power wherever you are, organize locally to exert a leverage on your elected officials, because those are the people who represent you, who are accountable to you, who, if you're doing your job right, are afraid of you, and push back to harness power to push back against Trump. Because fundamentally, Donald Trump would like you to think that he can be a dictator on day one, right? That's his whole thing, is projecting strength, is claiming powers he doesn't have, is saying, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to do that and nobody is going to stop me.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be real with ourselves. He is going to try to do a lot of very damaging and harmful stuff. But we actually have an enormous amount of power still within our system, within our democratic system, to stop him, because power in America is not concentrated with the president, right? I mean, well, there's quite a lot that's concentrated with the president, but power actually lies at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level in Congress. And we can actually tap into each of those levels to try to hold off harm, to make sure that we make this political case against what is happening and really reveal that the Trump agenda, for its chaos, its cruelty, its corruption, and then ultimately turn that into the electoral wins that are going to push the MAGA movement out.
So let me ask you a couple questions about that particularly, and some you may or may not know the answer to, but when we're talking about 15 trifectas, are there other states where we have a 2/3 or at least a 1/3? So for example, how many states have a Republican governor versus how many states have a Democratic governor?
That's a great question, and I don't have the exact numbers for you, but the short version is more than half of states have at least one chamber or the governorship that is Democratic. So there's a point of leverage for a lot of states around the country in your state government, right? Whether that is your governor, whether that is your attorney general, whether that is one or both chambers of your legislature. And that's not without even thinking about what power you might have at the county level, at the city level, right? When we're thinking about, for example, how the Trump mass deportation agenda is going to unfold, a lot of those questions are actually about how local law enforcement, which is often elected by and accountable to you, how they are going to interact with the federal government. So if you're thinking only in terms of, well, this is my elected representative at the federal level, this is my senator, you're not thinking about every lever that you might have to resist the Trump agenda and to fight back.
And I want to stress that, because the thing I find so remarkable about Indivisible is how empowering it is, and how it can, like many of our viewers, I was in despair. I was despondent. I was discouraged. I felt like there was nothing I could do and that I was going to drop out after the election. I was stunned. And then I thought, no, that's exactly what they want is, dictatorships are partly obey in advance, convince people that they have no power. And I'm not going to let them think that. And that is what you and Indivisible stand for, is that we really do. And at the local level, it's your Board of Education. It is your local school board, and whether they will ban books or not. Those are things that you can definitely influence and be involved in. And so it's not just write a letter to the president, write a letter to your senator or your representative in the federal government. Think about local, county, city, whatever, depending on where you live. I have a very powerful county and I have a very powerful city in my state. And I have, of course, I am in a very blue state, so I'm very blessed that I'm not worried. We welcome people here for abortion. We welcome people here who want to get a true education and be able to read whatever books they want to read. So it's important, though, I think, to get that message out. And you speak so well of the power of the collective action and the power of local as well as federal. So I want to, thank you for that. That is really important. What are some very specific things as we face Project 2025, which, no matter what Donald Trump says, really is his. And we can see from how many people he's appointing to cabinet level and sub-cabinet level positions that that's what he plans to do. What are some specific actions that you think citizens can take to protect against mass deportation, to protect against a federal ban on you name whatever it happens to be? What do you think are some of the priorities that we should be looking at?
Well, in our guide, we talk about three big plays that we think you should be taking. And which play is going to make the most sense for you depends on where you live. But the first one, I think, in some form or another, is applicable to everyone everywhere, which is pushing back on the Project 2025 agenda at the federal level. Now, I think there's something really important in what you said, which is Donald Trump got elected by distancing himself as much as possible from Project 2025, right? And we actually, when you look at the exit polls, when you look at some of the focus groups with voters, a big portion of the people who voted for Trump flat out did not believe that he is going to do either the things in Project 2025 or the things he literally said he was going to do. Now, that is to us a sign of the weakness of your coalition, right? Because a coalition that's built on being all things to all people when you are out of office is inherently unstable once you get into office. So for us, there is both a moral imperative to push back on Project 2025, and there's also a strategic imperative because we think this is the way that we break some of those people off of the Trump coalition. We pull them back in. We energize our base with them understanding what's really at threat and what we are really facing. Now, that's going to look like federal advocacy, right? That's going to be pushing your Democratic elected officials to all stand up to Donald Trump, because one of the things that we see during a period like this is after a loss, Democrats go kind of squishy and they start talking about maybe we should just go along with them. Like we should maybe just cooperate on the tax bill, et cetera, et cetera. No. The core way that we are going to win in 2026, the core way we are going to hold off harm until 2026 is we are going to all stand in opposition and present a really clear contrast and make clear that Donald Trump is doing the bidding of his billionaire donors, is doing the bidding of rich corporations in his agenda, and that we are fighting for working families. And so the first piece of this is just literally organizing to push back against Project 2025. If you've got a Democrat, you're asking them to find their spine and fight back. If you've got a Republican, you're holding them accountable for the worst and most unpopular things that are happening in Washington. That's particularly important if you've got a Republican who is in a swing district or a swing state who's up for re-election, because those are the folks we want to make sure that every single day when they go out in public, when they go to a ribbon cutting event, when they are answering questions from the local paper, that they are constantly being asked about the most recent, incredibly unpopular, incredibly screwed up thing that Donald Trump is doing. We want them to not be able to go a single news cycle without being linked to the chaos, the cruelty, and the corruption that is coming from Washington, D.C. So that's pushing back against Project 2025.
I love your phraseology of chaos, corruption, and cruelty, because that is what it is. But I want to ask some specific questions. One, I don't want any misunderstanding about at least my position, which is I come from an era when there was bipartisanship and it worked. And so while I do say that I've never faced the kind of cruelty and craziness that I think is before us right now, I think there is room for bipartisanship in some cases. And that does not mean caving to the worst parts of this. But there was a bipartisan immigration bill. Yes, not perfect, not everything I would have liked, but it sure is a good start. And so would you oppose, for example, cooperation on immigration reform?
Well, what we're hearing from all of our sources is that Republicans are preparing to move an immigration package that is not going to look anything like that bipartisan bill. Just to be honest with you, so I think there's one set of questions around. In the abstract, is bipartisanship a good thing? Is it possible? And there are examples of bipartisanship in recent years that have happened, right? And we're not kind of lockstep opposed to the concept of bipartisanship. What we are opposed to is confirming the terms on which Donald Trump is playing, right? Is kind of like playing on his game in a way that reinforces his appeal as common sense, as bipartisan, as kind of like the natural, like appropriate order of things. And so when it comes to immigration, what we are fully expecting is that they're going to come out with a package and with a set of expectations that looks less like the bipartisan package and more like what House Republicans were pushing, which was basically a non-starter for any Democrat
Right.
who was kind of aligned with, basic human rights law and dignity. And so what I would say here is that I think there's an abstract conversation about that, but I also think that we're going to actually see most of those abstract versions off the table. And what we
Right.
really want to do is make sure that Democrats are telling people a really clear story about what's happening in Washington.
Right. And that gets to messaging, which is, I think that the policies that have been put forth by the Democratic Party haven't been understood as the solutions, partly because it isn't clear that Democrats have communicated they feel the pain that led people to switch to the Republican Party, to Trump. And so that it's not just a question of communicating what the policies are and how they would help the people who voted differently, but communicating, we understand, we just have different solutions to your pain. And getting the facts out is so, I mean, obviously this show is called Just the Facts for a reason. It's because I really believe facts matter. And I'm sorry, I don't know. I hope everyone is noticing Jill's pin, which says Just the Facts, which is based on the show that I grew up with, Dragnet, where Sergeant Friday started every show with Just the Facts, ma'am. And I think that that's what we need to get out, is these facts. And do you have any specific ways that you think that we could communicate that people who voted for Trump, we understand you, we have better solutions that will actually help you, not the rich donors who supported Donald Trump? What's the way to do that?
Yeah. Oh, we could spend the entire rest of the podcast on that question because there are so many layers. I think there is a question about what is the message, right? Like literally, what are we saying? And then who is the messenger? And then how are we delivering it? How is that message from that messenger actually reaching the people who need to hear it? And I think that it's a little early to do a full autopsy of 2024, right? We don't even have the voter file back. But what we're seeing early is that we had failures on each of those fronts, right? That it was about, are we necessarily landing a message with people who are collectively in a pretty sour mood, right? We saw kind of broadly. Again, I'm hesitant to get into like this demographic group did that, or et cetera, et cetera. But what we definitely saw was that there was an electorate that was frustrated with the status quo, that was still feeling the pain of inflation, and that some set of voters did not see the threat that Donald Trump posed to democracy and to policies that they generally supported as greater than, their dissatisfaction with how things currently were, right? And that's like a very high level, because that's, that covers people who didn't bother to vote, that covers people who voted for Trump, who we might have won in a different time. All of those folks, we got to reach them in a bunch of different ways, right? And we got to reach them with appeals that are about the policy, but also about kind of our overall orientation. And I think to your point here, we've got to reach them in ways that they feel like they can trust that is about more than policy, right? One of the things that I think is really important and that I'm taking away from this cycle is that there's kind of like left to right in your ideological premises. And then there's actually kind of pro-system, anti-system, pro-change, anti-change, right? Do people frame themselves as invested in the institutions, or do people frame themselves as invested in the American people? And unfortunately, the really painful thing about this cycle is that Donald Trump was able to flip the script on us, right? He was able to claim this change candidate. He was able to say, I'm going to upset the status quo. And he put us in the position of defending stuff that even we would acknowledge doesn't always work very well for people, right? And so now we've got this really challenging task, which is that we have to defend a bunch of things that are really important about our systems and our government and, the rule of law. And also we have to acknowledge that a lot of people do not feel that those things are working for them or have been working for them for a really long time, right? So that is the double kind of the bind that we're in. Now,
but besides him saying, I am the change, he said, I am your retribution.
100%.
And that raises some questions for me about pardons. and
Mhm.
the pardon of his son, but also whether Joe Biden should, before he leaves office, and I have a series of questions about things he should do that we maybe should focus on. And one of those is, how do you feel about pardons for people threatened who are on the Kash Patel enemies list, who Donald Trump has verbally said, I'm going to go after? Nancy Pelosi, the people on the January 6th committee, um, obviously Jack Smith and his team. I mean, there are many
Yeah.
people who have done nothing wrong. They
No.
don't need a pardon because they haven't done anything wrong, but they may need a pardon to avoid spending a lot of time, effort, and money defending themselves. Although I do believe the lawyers of America will volunteer in huge numbers pro bono services to defend these people, but it's still going to be their time to defend themselves against things that are totally made up and that
Right.
aren't within the rule of law. They aren't. I mean, I'm a, I loved my time at the Department of Justice. I loved that we had the opportunity to do justice by only bringing cases where there was significant, credible evidence of criminal conduct that would convince a jury to convict and that would convince an appellate court to sustain the conviction. We're not in that era anymore. And so rules that I would have said applied before, I'm questioning now whether we
Yeah.
need those pardons. Does Indivisible have a
Yeah.
position on that?
What I would say as a general premise and as a general approach is that the Biden administration should be doing absolutely everything in its power to democracy proof America right now, right? And that is, whether that is about who is going to be on Trump's target list, whether that is about clearing death row, right? Because we
Yeah.
know that Donald Trump's going to get in and he's just going to go on a
Yeah.
killing spree, basically. Whether that is about, what data and information the federal, whether that, that was can we cut that part? Okay. Sorry. Whether that is about, how the administration is orienting towards legislation that is moving, right? What we should be seeing is kind of a collective, all systems go effort to do whatever is possible to insulate the federal government and its employees and people in general from the threat that the incoming administration poses. Now, what I will say on the pardons piece is, you're not going to be able to preemptively pardon everyone who is going to come under threat in the coming period, right? There is a set of kind of high level political targets that we can anticipate. And then there's just a really broad swath of people. And I think we saw this most recently with HR 9495, the nonprofit killer bill, which was coming through Congress, right? That's a new effort to basically give the Treasury Department the ability to designate nonprofits as terrorism, supporters of terrorism. They're going to come up with a bunch of new creative ways to harass, to make illegal, to go after their opponents in the forthcoming period. That is not going to be able, you cannot successfully preemptively get everybody who is going to come under threat safe.
Well, okay, so how about this one is something that President Biden has about 6 weeks left to do, and that is to get Congress, the Senate, to confirm all pending judicial nominations. We don't want to leave any vacancies that Donald Trump will fill with people like Cannon and Kaczmarek. We know what damage can be done at the district court level. We know what damage has been done at that level, as well as obviously at the Supreme Court level. There are no Supreme Court vacancies now, but there are at the Court of Appeals level and at the district court level. What can people do as part of the Indivisible movement or in any other way to encourage that the Senate, Schumer, get active and make sure that there are no vacancies that we could fill right now?
This is a topic close to our hearts. We actually just collaborated with a bunch of our partners to deliver sleeping bags to the Democratic senators, and our message is a lot of people who voted for you work overtime to get their jobs done, and we expect you to put in the hours that it takes to get these people across the finish line right now. So what I would say is this falls very much under that category of tell your Democrat to find their spine, right? If you've got a Democratic senator, let them know that you don't want them to leave for recess. You don't want them to leave for the holidays until everybody
Yeah.
who can possibly be confirmed, everybody who's nominated has been confirmed. That includes judges. It also includes folks like appointees to the National Labor Relations Bureau, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
or board. So just making sure that we are maximizing whatever gains we possibly can with every single day that is left with the Biden administration.
And that will protect democracy because
100%.
it means that there will be at least some rational thought and debate given when new vacancies come up, that there will still be some people left who have a viewpoint that might support where we are now. What about the Equal Rights Amendment? Now, there's a big debate as to whether or not President Biden could instruct the archivist by saying all the conditions have been met. There are 38 states that have ratified this. It's ready to be published. And there is some debate as to whether that would work or whether it will go to this Supreme Court because of the issue of the timeline. There seems no way that President Biden is going to be able to get a joint resolution extending it or eliminating the timeline. But it seems to me that there is a chance that Donald Trump, who controls, as you said, he's got a trifecta, he controls everything. He can get a joint resolution. He wants to help women. He said he would help us whether we wanted it or not. I'm saying right now, I want his help. I want his help by telling Congress to eliminate the timeline, the time constraints on passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, and then notify the archivist that it's ready for publication. What do you think? Can
Yeah.
President Biden do it? Could he accomplish this? Would that be safe, or is it too risky?
Well, so here's what I'd say. I think that for the rest of our lives, literally anything good is going to get appealed in the courts. And so, yes, there will be a legal challenge. Yes, it may go to the Supreme Court. What I'd say in that case is make them strike it down. Make them explain to the American people why the ERA should not be valid, right? We should be trying to do whatever we can to push the ideas that we can with the power that we have during this time. And so, first of all, I wouldn't give up on that Biden.
Well, do you see the lack of a joint congressional resolution as being grounds for the Supreme Court to strike it down and make us start all over again, which I see as a hopeless task, and that it would be worth taking the chance of getting the congressional joint resolution?
I see the prospects of that happening under Trump as extremely low, and like sufficiently low that I would view that as kind of like simply deciding to wait until you have a Democratic administration again in the future. So just to be totally honest, I would say I would prefer a strategy that focuses on using the power that we know that we have now with people that we know that we are aligned. I would also say, as it relates to the Supreme Court, I think that we should move out of the period, for most of my life, when we have talked about a case that's going to the Supreme Court, we've talked about it in terms of how strong are the grounds based on the Constitution, based on relevant statutes, et cetera, for the court to rule one way or the other. I think we have to get out of that habit when it relates to the current majority on the Supreme Court, right? They are fundamentally a partisan group of actors motivated by partisan considerations and retroactively justifying it in terms of or in terms of relevant legal arguments. And so, I think I think that the question of are we on strong legal ground is secondary to the question of what will the Supreme Court want to do and how will they justify it.
So, how many members in various or how many chapters and how many members in those chapters does Indivisible have?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've got over 2,300 chapters around the country right now, or groups as we call them. Groups are joining every day. We have seen more groups joining since November than we have seen since 2017.
Wow.
And those groups vary really widely. They can be local, very, very local communities. They can be, a dozen people in a small town in Tennessee. They can be thousands of people in a major city. They're largely volunteer led. They are people, regular people who are not doing politics as their day job, who said,
Yeah.
"I've got to do something about this situation," and started organizing. Put up a Facebook page saying, "Hey, come to my house. We're going to start figuring out how we can pressure our elected officials together." Usually found that that was a pretty fun and fulfilling way to spend their time. Started getting together regularly to do it.
Yes.
That is the core of the Indivisible story.
And it really is a empowering feeling to know that you are actually doing something that could help turn this around, because turn it around we must. And um, I've been working for the ERA since 1976, and I want to see this happen. So
Mm-hmm.
folks, get yourselves together and start pressuring for um, what is clearly the case. 38 states have ratified. Very few things in law are absolutely clear, but I think it's absolutely clear that attempts to de-ratify, to rescind your ratification, are completely, that's a non-starter. You cannot do that. So 38
Mm-hmm.
states have ratified. That's over and done. That's all that it takes. The time that was set was in a preamble. It wasn't in the text, and therefore it is totally irrelevant. And I think it's time for President Biden, as his legacy, it would be his biggest legacy, to give rights, equal rights, to everyone in this country. Women can vote, but that's about the only mention of us. It's, all men are created equal. Well, I want women to be created equal. So Joe Biden, let the archivists know that it is time to publish, because all that is in the way is someone notifying the archivist that all the conditions have been met and that it's time to publish and make this an enforceable part of our Constitution. And I hope that Indivisible members are listening. I hope anyone who's watching us now will consider joining or starting a group wherever you are. It's something that you will feel will turn your anger and your disgust into action and make you feel much, much better. So I really appreciate your joining us today. I hope that you will get this message out to all your members and that they will continue the work they've been doing. Thank you for everything you've done. And all the Indivisible members, your work has been invaluable, and don't give up. In 2 years, we can turn around some of what we are facing, but let's get judges and other appointees to the federal agencies confirmed before noon on January 20th. And members of Congress, use your sleeping bags. Get this done. You can't rest until you've done everything you can to ensure that the rule of law continues. And so thank you, Leah. Thank you, Indivisible. And thank you to everyone who's watching us now. Come back next week for another episode of Just the Facts.
Thank you, Jill.